Now, what happened to the bodies of those criminals, murderers, and thieves who were executed at the gallows in the grass market? Their bodies were taken to the graveyard, and just around the corner from the grass market, we find Greyfriars Graveyard, which is one of the 5 historical graveyards of Edinburgh. Greyfriars take the name from the Franciscan friary on the site, which was dissolved in the 1560s. Since Franciscan friars used to walk around in their greyish robes, this gave the name to the graveyard that was established in the 1600s after the friary was dissolved. Now, this graveyard is a very interesting historical site. Here you can find the gravestones of notable Edinburgh citizens. You can also see a section of the old city wall. Edinburgh was, just like many other European medieval city, a walled city. And so in the Greyfriars Graveyard, you can still see one section of this late medieval wall. You can also go on a Harry Potter trail inside the graveyard if that's of interest, because you can find some gravestones with the names of obviously real Edinburgh citizens, but those names are also the names of some of the characters in the Harry Potter books. Moody, McGonagall, Thomas, Riddle. These are among the gravestones that you can find. And from the gate of the graveyard, you can also get a beautiful view of one of the oldest schools of Edinburgh, a school called George Heriot that was built and opened in the 1620s. George Heriot, after whom the school is named, was a jewelry maker who worked for the crown, and specifically for King James, the first James VI. When George Heriot died childless, he donated the money, his fortune, to the city of Edinburgh, and asked, and we can see this in his will, he asked for a hospital for the fatherless boys of Edinburgh to be built. Hospital at that time simply meant school, and so over time the school changed. It's now no longer a school it's no longer only a boys' school. It's very much a school open to every kid, and it's a day school. So from the gates of Greyfriars, you'll be able to see this beautiful building. Now, among the most interesting parts of the graveyard, perhaps the most fascinating one is the part of the graveyard where we find a mort safe. Now, mort safe is a metal cage, and you have 2 examples, surviving examples in Greyfriars. Now, this metal cage was used in the 19th century to keep dead bodies safe. Now, in the 19th centuries, around the 1820s, the School of Medicine at the University of Edinburgh flourished, and many young Scots wanted to become doctors. So the more the students at university, the more the number of classes that were taught, and the more the number of dead bodies that were needed, so that the students could dissect the bodies and study the anatomy. So there was a high demand for dead bodies from the University of Edinburgh, and the demand was met by the body snatchers, men who would go to Edinburgh graveyards at night to dig up fresh dead bodies and then what they would do, they would sell these bodies to the doctors and the professors at the University of Edinburgh. Body snatchers were receiving a cash payment between 8 and 12 pounds for each body they were selling. And so this was an illegal but lucrative business. And so the city, in order to protect the dead bodies, they put in place these mortar-safe, these metal cages. This is quite a large cage, about 2 meters for 2 meters, and you can easily fit inside 4 coffins. So the coffins and the dead bodies would have been left in the cage long enough for the bodies to start to decompose. At that point, the bodies were no longer fresh, no longer good to be dissected, and the body snatchers would have had no interest in stealing those bodies. Once the bodies started to decompose, the coffins were removed from the morgue safe and buried near their gravestones. So there's a very funny movie, Burke and Hare. This is a dark comedy, part of which was also filmed in Edinburgh. And Burke and Hare were 2 Irishmen who moved to Edinburgh right around the 1820s. They were not stealing bodies from the graveyards, but they were murderers. In just 1 year, they killed 17 victims, and they were selling the bodies of their victims to the School of Medicine at the University of Edinburgh. They were imprisoned. At some point, the police suspected that these 2 men were behind the mysterious disappearance of prostitutes and homeless people. They had very specific targets. And at the end, Burke confessed the crimes, and he was also the one executed at the gallows. Here, walked away. We don't know what happened to him, but if you go to the Anatomy Museum at the University of Edinburgh, the skeleton of Burke is right there on display. And one final stop in the graveyard is at the gravestone of Bobby. Bobby is Edinburgh's most famous and most loyal dog. Bobby was a small Skye Terrier who belonged to one of the policemen of Edinburgh around the 1860s. When Bobby's master died, his name was John Gray. John was buried in Greyfriars Kirkyard, and the dog, masterless at that point, went to the graveyard every day for many years and simply sat in front of the grave of his master. People in Edinburgh got to know Bobby. They were leaving water and food for the dog outside of the graveyard. So when Bobby itself died at the age of 16 years old, the dog was taken to the graveyard, buried there, and then a small statue was commissioned by the city council to celebrate and remember Bobby forever. And so the statue of the dog can be seen right outside of the graveyard in front of the Greyfriars Bobby pub.